Today's video is going to be a little different than normal because I'm going to be telling you a story of my first experience visiting a Japanese Sento or a traditional bathhouse. The story is going to be a little bit embarrassing, a little funny, and is a memory I don't think I'll forget anytime soon. My family was about 3 weeks into our dream vacation to Japan. We had a stressful time leading up to this particular moment, as the last few weeks were spent walking 100 times more than we had in the last 10 years, and we were endlessly trying to run from one area to another in Tokyo, all while learning the customs and procedures of the area without a whole lot of Japanese language knowledge. To say we were physically and mentally exhausted was an understatement. As planned, we took a vacation inside our vacation and were visiting the area of Kyoto, well known for its relaxed atmosphere, iconic temples, and old school Japan vibes. We'd assumed these 4 days in Kyoto would be relaxing, but instead we found more stress as navigating the train seemed more difficult than in Tokyo. And knowing we only had so long to see everything we wanted to see led us to actually being even more busy than the previous parts of our trip. It was our last night in Kyoto, and as we returned from our long day of walking and hiking, I laid down in the hotel bed and saw it was close to 10 p.m. My feet were buzzing, and I swore every muscle in my body was exhausted. I was thinking back to the massage chairs we used in the Tokyo Skytree Mall, and how great it felt to have my muscles relaxed for once. It was hard to daydream, though, as my feet were really killing me. If they had mouths, they'd be screaming in my face at this point. I wanted to do something to relieve them. We had a bath in the hotel, which was nice compared to the tiny shower stall in our Tokyo rental, but I felt at this point I needed a more extreme measure. After thinking about it and Googling around on my phone, I realized there was a Sento nearby, and it was even listed as not caring about patrons having tattoos, which was super good. I really wanted to go to an onsen in Japan, but it didn't really seem like it was going to pan out, so I got extra excited at the thought of at least seeing what a traditional bathhouse was like. I knew that these places had pretty specific procedures, though. There was a kind of set order to do things that you needed to do in order to bathe there, so I went to trusty old YouTube and pulled up the first video that looked good on how to use a Japanese Sento. It was an amazing video, which I've linked below if you want to see it yourself after this one. It showed a group of muscle-heavy young men who walked into the front of the building and stepped into a room to place their shoes in a provided locker. The lockers all had these little wooden keys that they would take with them to the next room. They paid in coin on the way in and entered the next portion of the building, the men's locker room. In the locker room, they took off all their clothes, placed their belongings in the locker, got their towel in hand, and put their new wooden locker key around their wrist. It's worth mentioning at this point, the entire video is set in this very well-lit, clean, and modern-looking space. The men all seemed cheerful as they showed the viewer the wonders of how great this place was, and they really shone bright with their confidence to the point that the viewers can't really help but also feel as confident about their first trip to the Sento. Anyway, the men then, naked and cheerfully, walk up to the bathing area, grab a nice clean bucket and a clean stool sitting outside the doors, and they make their way inside to bathe. The process for bathing is fairly simple, but it takes a little bit of work. You enter the room, and there's these little shower spigots on the wall about belly button height, one after another in a long line. Below the spigot is a tile shelf, and under that shelf is another water spigot, but more like the kind you'd see on an industrial sink or something. In the video, the men gleefully clean their bodies using soap, shampoo, and their towels, which I guess I forgot to mention for us Westerners are more like a mixture between a bath towel and a washcloth in size, but it's used like a washcloth more than it is a towel. The basic idea is that you set down your plastic stool, sit on it, wash your hair with the long shower head, and then you spend a long time meticulously cleaning every tiny miniature square inch of your body with soap and towel, all while remaining seated on the stool. It's important to be an absolutely perfect level of clean, as after you're done, you fill the bucket with water using the lower spigot and rinse yourself completely off in order to enter the baths. If you were to be unclean in any way, all that uncleanliness would make its way into the baths, which are used by all. I mentioned in a previous video that the one thing I learned quite possibly above all else on this trip was that watching YouTube videos and reading about doing things in Japan is a vastly different thing than having actual knowledge from the experience of doing things in real life yourself. It's incredibly easy to watch a video like that and think, wowee, I'm going to go to the Sento now and look like I know exactly what I'm doing. No one will ever know that. I haven't gone 1,000 times before. I know it's easy to do because this was me. I watched the video and I confidently left the house on my way to the Sento in the cold Kyoto night. I might not seem it from the YouTube videos I do, but in reality, I'm a pretty unconfident guy. I worry a lot about things, I have a lot of anxiety, and I'm incredibly awkward in new situations. Despite leaving the house feeling like Mr. Confidence, about halfway there, my mind started thinking about all the worries I had deep down. I thought about how fat that I am, how I have weird tattoos everywhere, and that I by no means fit in. I started to worry about messing up and looking like a fool in front of all these people. Being naked wouldn't help. I don't know them, and I'll likely never see them again as long as I live, but that didn't stop me from worrying. By the time I got to the entrance of the building, I was a bundle of nerves. It's dark out. I'm nervous. My mind is racing, and I'm standing in front of a building, trying to muster my mental fortitude to do this. I think back to the video and calm myself down, telling myself this is going to be easy. I can do this. And I look forward to the entrance, spotting a curtain to the right of the vending machines. Walk through and enter a small room. Directly in front of me is the lockers I was hoping to see. I open one up, and as I'm putting my shoes in the locker, an older woman, fast as lightning, opens the locker next to me, places her shoes inside, and appears to run from me. I caught a glimpse of her face. It appeared to be in pure horror. I can't seem to think of why. Then I get scared. I somehow entered the woman's side. I look around the room next to the lockers in front of me. I see a curtain with a piece of paper with kanji drawn on it. To its right is a solid wall section. To the right of that, another curtain with another kanji on paper. And on the other side of the room, I see another set of lockers. I'm a bit shaken, but I take out my phone and translate the kanji on the paper stuck to the curtains. As expected, the one closest to me translates as woman, and the other curtain, men. Crisis avoided, I suppose. The worst crime I committed here was putting my shoes in the female lockers. I debate on switching my shoes over, but decided it's just a gaijin mistake, and oh well. I take my little metal locker key after I figure out how the weird lock works, and I proceed into the next area. Across the curtain and to my left, I see a little old Japanese man that honestly looks right out of an anime. He's kind of like the old version of Cotton Hill from King of the Hill, only skinnier and not aggressive. I notice the layout of the room, which I find kind of odd. It's a very large open room with a divider running down the middle, separating the men from the women's side. But there's a large gap towards the entrance doors as the person who's manning the front counter handles both sides. It's a kind of curtain thing that I guess is supposed to offer some coverage, but the old man doesn't seem to care to use it, and at this time, it's kind of not covering much. This leaves a weird space where the women's changing room is viewable from the men's and vice versa. Nervously, I reach out my arms and I show him I have tattoos. The man responds by handing me a piece of paper with kanji and a yen amount. I think it was around 400 or something yen. It was super cheap. He obviously doesn't care about my tattoos and he just wants the money. I tell him I want a towel too, gesturing in a way like I'm playing charades. He points at my 10 yen coin and he puts 2 up on his finger. I pay him 20 more yen, and he hands me a towel. The room I'm in has a series of larger lockers than before, each with wooden keys. Remember the video with the cheery men getting naked and placing all their belongings and clothes in the locker? Unlike the vibrant atmosphere and cheerful mood from the video, I feel alone and in the dark. I have to get naked now. I have to do it with the woman's changing room in view of me and an old man who doesn't seem to have anything else better to do at this time other than watch an awkward, fat, tattooed American get naked nervously. I continue to pretend like I know what I'm doing, and I put everything in the locker, lock it, and put the key on my wrist. I walk to the bathhouse doors and look around for buckets and stools. I'm confused. This isn't like the video all of a sudden. There's some buckets, but no stools. The buckets are sitting in a way as if they're spare or discarded. Are they bad buckets? It's a really simple thing, but I'm kind of starting to panic in a slight way that this isn't exactly what I expected. I look around for a stool. I don't see one anywhere. I think about what to do, and the door opens up. An old Japanese man looks at me like I'm being a crazy person. He ushers me to walk into the next room. He points to my right at another pile of buckets, and at this time stools too. He grabs the bucket that's in my hand, and he gestures for me to put it back. Afterwards, he closes the door, leaving me in the Sento. I grab a bucket and a stool. I look ahead of me through the steam. To my right is a line of shower heads and spigots, just like in the video. To the left is a series of baths. At the end, there's a sauna. And in the middle is a short half wall with spigots and shower heads that are on flexible tubes. There's about 8 or 9 other men in the room, all of which are hard staring at me from my apparently disruptive entrance. I'm standing there naked, holding a bucket in one hand and a stool in the other, more nervous than I think I've ever been in my adult life. Everything I know goes out my head. I hang my head low and I go to use a middle shower out of nervousness as there's no one else in that area showering. An old man sees me trying to figure out how to turn on the shower and he shakes his head, waving his hands in an X. He waves me to move over to the wall next to a younger man showering that I didn't notice until now. The man who ushered me over points at the shower and he makes a charades-like gesture for washing my body. I nod and say, "Hi." He nods and hobbles back to his shower stool. I sit on my stool. It's a lot colder than I expected. The plastic isn't a great feeling at first, and I'm sitting like I'm on a small child's piece of furniture. It feels like I'm in trouble. I turn on the water and adjust the temperature. I get my hair and body wet and look around for soap and shampoo. For whatever reason, my mind is being very American, and I'm expecting to find a little soap dispenser on the wall that has soap and shampoo. I don't see it. I look around more, and I see on the shelf below the shower, there's random bottles of shampoos and soap. Various brands, and they all have little kanji or something written on them in permanent marker. In my head, I think the Japanese writing are probably names, and the bottles are just those that are brought in by regulars for their personal use. I don't know what to do. On top of it, I realize not only do I not have soap, but I left my towel in the locker. I debate going back for it, but my nerves are completely shot at this time. My embarrassment is high. Even though it's not a short walk, the idea of me getting up at this point, going to my locker, and returning with my towel freaks me out. It also feels like it's 2 literal football fields away. Like the awkward weirdo I am, I sit under the water and I rub my hands through my hair and on my body, washing without soap as if that's a thing any normal human being does. I hear the young guy next to me. "Oi!" I look over and he's shaking a shampoo bottle and little soap bottle at me. He slides them down the counter and he gestures the body cleaning signal. I say, "Hi, arigato," and realize the random bottles aren't personal items, but the items to be used by the patrons. Finally, I'm moving forward with this process. I take the shampoo and I clean my hair like I've never cleaned my hair before, trying my best to ensure everyone around me sees I'm actually properly cleaning myself after I just spent a ton of time looking like a buffoon. The body soap is where things got weird though. I didn't have my towel, so I had to apply that by hand only. In hopes of making everyone feel better about me doing this, I spent an absurd amount of time washing my body, over and over and over. Felt like I did this for about 40 minutes. Can't really say how uncomfortable and weird this is at this point. Cleaning myself like an animal while sitting on what feels like a scratchy child's stool just isn't pleasant. When I'm done, I fill my bucket up with water and I dump it over my head multiple times until I'm certain I'm fully clean. At this point, I freeze again. My anxiety is still kicking in, and I realize I now need to stand up, do something with my bucket and stool, and I need to get into the bath. The water runs over me as I stall for time, as if I take long enough to do what I need to do, it'll be better. Eventually, I feel like sitting in the water doing nothing is worse than just getting up, and I stand up from the stool, leaving both items behind, and I walk over to the closest pool of water. In front of me are 2 pools of water. One is larger, separated into 2 sections, one for sitting like a chair, the other one for sitting with your legs stretched out in front of you. There's jets going in this bath, kind of like a hot tub. The other is just simple square shape, and it seems to be fairly deep. There's 2 men in the jet tub sitting on the chair side, so I decided to try the square tub with no one in it. Side story again, but I read reviews for this place before I went, and one common theme I found is that this place I chose to go to was apparently a very traditional old school bath, primarily catering for old men. I guess the newer, more modern Sentos are designed in a way to make things more comfortable and open to a wider audience, but this type I went to just catered to old men. Besides having less modern elements, a key element to this is the water temperature. I was to expect the heat levels of the pool to be much higher and much colder than the more modern Sentos. I'm not an expert and I've only been to one Sento, but this was the comment I commonly read. With that said, I picked the deep square pool as my first choice. As a note of caution, I dipped my fingers into the water to test their temperature. Literal microseconds after touching the tip of my fingers into the water, I ripped my hand out. This water was so wildly hot, I had no idea how it was actually not in a rolling boil state. I felt like I had put my hands on a stovetop burner. They hurt so bad from touching it. I immediately decided that was the hot pool of the group, and I was not physically ready for that. I went back over to the jet pool and I touched the water. This pool felt hot, but in no way as uncomfortable as the hot pool moments ago. I put my feet in and I felt the heat radiate up my body. I walked over to the side of the bath, sat down, and stretched my legs in front of me. I decided this was the time for me to do some deep breathing and focus on relaxing my mind. Initially, this was very challenging. I remember I laid in the bath being so uncomfortable and shaken that it was hard for me to even find any appreciation for what I was doing. My inner monologue was loud and clear. Get out! Get out! Get out! You are not comfortable here. This is not the place for you. You sat in a bath and you got the experience. That's good enough. Go home. You can tell your story. I wanted to go home, and it was all I could think about. I wasn't relaxed, and I wasn't happy. I honestly didn't think a Sento was for me. I was just too uncomfortable. Still, I remained. I continued to calm myself down, and I started telling myself I was going to be more hard-headed, then I was going to be a big baby about this. Eventually, as I was lost in my own head, I stopped worrying because the heat started to override my anxiety. Naturally, for whatever reason, I'm a bit sensitive to heat. I started to feel a little woozy and a little lightheaded, which normally would be awful, but because it was distracting me from my anxiety, it kind of forced me to relax, and before I knew it, I started to loosen up, kind of melt away into this pool. I started looking around the place now that I was out of my head. On the wall was a big mural made from tile. I had read earlier that was a pretty common theme for older bathhouses. It reminded me of the anime Nia Under 7 for some reason. I was remembering when they took the space alien plant and used it for heating the bathwater due to its wonderful smell. I noticed the pool had a very light smell to it. It wasn't like the chlorine-saturated pools and the hot tubs back home, but instead a lot more of a natural and soft scent. It was almost like sulfur or something, but in a pleasant way. I continued to look around and started paying attention to what others were doing. I saw an old man take his stool before his shower and scrub it with soap before sitting down. I realized I made the mistake of not doing that among all my other mistakes. I saw a man enter the bath much different than I. He didn't touch the water with his fingers, but instead he took a bucket, filled it with water from the pool, poured the water on his feet, filled the bucket again, and then dumped that water from the neck down before getting into the pool. I guess that was the much more proper way to pre-acclimate to the water's temperature. I also saw a great trick for washing your back. As I mentioned before, the towels were like a bath towel with the washcloth mixed. This means that the towel is skinnier like a washcloth, but also long like a towel. A pro trick, probably really just common, it is common, I'm sure, is just to fold the towel widthwise in half and then put the towel behind your back. Grab each side of the towel on the long side. It'll make a long, strong towel that you can kind of move back and forth across your back, cleaning it really well. Again, I'm sure it's really common. Maybe even more places than just Japan. But it was my first time ever seeing this, and now that I have a towel like that at home for showering, I do it myself to have a cleaner back. There's a lot to learn from watching how other people behaved in the bathhouse. Another thing I noticed was how others used the other baths. On the far side was a bright red pool, which I think is referred to as a medicinal bath. There was a paper handwritten sign in Japanese next to it with a few words, but I had no idea what they said, so I don't know exactly what the pool was for. I did know, though, that I never saw anyone go into it for more than a minute at a time. I wanted to try that pool next, so I got out of the jet bath and I walked over to the red pool. I dipped my feet in and I found the temperature to not really be cool, but it was colder than the jet pool. Watercolor was really saturated and I almost wondered if I'd leave it looking red myself. It was a deep pool, so I kind of just stood there and floated around for a bit, looking at the color and smelling the water. Can't really describe what it smelled like, and I spent about 10 minutes or so trying to put my finger on what word I would use to describe it. Unfortunately, I didn't come up with anything. It was a light smell and not unpleasant. Since I spent about 10 times more in the pool than anyone else, I decided to leave, and I walked all the way down to the opposite end of the pools. I wasn't colored red from the medicinal pool, by the way. At the far end of the pools was the cold pool. It was obvious because the sounds most people made when they got in, and most people didn't stay very long at all. I'd say people spend even less time in it than the medicinal pool. I was kind of nervous about this one for various reasons, but mostly because I don't really care for being in cold water. I took a bucket and I poured the water on my feet, then on my chest, and I walked over to the cool pool. My first thought was that the water was bitter cold, and as quickly as I got in, I wanted to get out. However, since I'm kind of sensitive to heat, I forced myself to lean back and remain in order to pull my body temperature down so I could try the other pools again before I left. Quickly, I started to realize I actually really liked this pool, and I couldn't exactly explain why. Then, for some reason or another, I started to feel incredibly euphoric, like I was on drugs almost. I laid back and I took in the experience. My body relaxed, my muscles loosened, I was taking long and deep breaths, and I realized the water was really heavily mentholated. I'm not sure if it was the rapid body temperature change from hot to cold, the extreme menthol I was breathing deeply, or something else in the water, but It was firmly at this point that I started to really enjoy my time and understand why someone would go to the Sento. After a few minutes in the cold bath, I went back in the jet water and spent a little bit of time thinking what I would do next. The hot water was really intimidating, and I wasn't sure if I was ready or even willing to get in there, but I also didn't want to miss out on the experience of each of the 5 tubs. As I was debating on my next decision, I saw a younger man get into the pool between the medicinal bath and the jet bath. Wasn't exactly sure what that bath offered, but I did see in passing that, like the medicinal bath, this one also had a sign. Instead of being handwritten in Japanese, though, it was printed and featured both Japanese and English on it. The writing looked ominous and stated simply, "Do not touch the electric plates." Wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but I'd heard a little bit about types of baths found in Japan called electric baths. I heard they were good for muscle aches, but also there was some chatter online about the safety concerns of the bath. After going from the low of extreme anxiety to the highs of finally finding relaxation and euphoria from the Sento experience, I was feeling oddly adventurous and even invincible. I figured if I survived all the stress I had, then I should definitely not leave until I've tried all the baths out, despite seeing people act very oddly to the electric bath, some only submerging their legs and not their entire bodies, and only for a very brief time. I approached the bath and I first looked in. It was another deep bath, but this time it had another 2 bench seats facing each other in the water, and on the area where you'd normally rest your back, there was 2 metal plates with holes in them that ran across the back part, somewhat similar to the size of a keyboard. Looking closer at the plates, you could see 2 electrical wires wrapped in the metal in 2 different places. I assumed it was a positive and a ground, but I don't fully understand how this works. I think most people who have been shocked by electricity have a good idea on what it's like to get into an electric bath, honestly. I felt like I knew what the feeling would be, but as soon as my lowered foot touched the water, I realized it was so much crazier than that. It's really difficult to explain, but the best way I can explain it is to imagine every muscle in your body, even ones you don't know were separate from any other muscles, hardening instantly, as if you need to use every fiber of your muscles to grab onto something to save your life. The instant my foot touched the water, the electricity fired straight up my leg, up the side of my chest, down my arm, and into my hand, cramping every single muscle along the way. Initially, it felt brutally painful, and I just stared in shock as my hand clenched, an incredibly tight fist in front of my face. I tried to fight it, and it seemed impossible. So instead, I pushed my foot into the water and then both legs and quickly sat down, making sure my back stayed away from the back plate behind me. I stared at my hand, and I felt my body start to accept what it was going through, eventually allowing me to open my fist up and move myself again freely. As for the rest of my body's experience, I can only describe it like so. Imagine the 2 plates are creating an invisible beam that goes from one side to the other. Anything that touches this beam gets shocked much more intensely than outside of it. As your body gets closer to a plate, the intensity increases. Where the beam is most intense, it's like a blade that shoots completely through your body, and everything in the layer of the blade just starts rapidly vibrating like an intense muscle spasm. In explanation, it probably sounds awful, but once you succumb to what's happening to you, it's as if you're getting the deepest, most intense massage through an entire section of your body. As a person with back pain that I have never been able to get full relief from, it was the most surreal experience of my life. I sat in the bath and I lifted my body, moving it up and down and close and far to the electric field, working out every muscle in my back like I've never experienced in my life before. It felt unreal and absolutely unnatural, but also offered some of the most intense relief I've ever experienced in my life for pain. After I finished with my back and I couldn't take it anymore, I did the same with my calves and finally my feet. By the time I left the pool, I felt like I had reset the pain and wear in my body back by a week, which was saying an incredible amount, as the trip to this point had beaten me up physically. I left the bath and realized I was basically shaking all over at this point. I honestly probably spent a little too much time in there. I went into the jet pool to stretch out and relax, moved to the cool pool to drop my body temperature way down, then returned to the jet pool to prepare myself to tackle the hot pool. When I was ready, I approached the final boss, the hot bath. Being that I felt as if I scaled my skin just by touching it before, I decided to try the acclimation method and scooped up a bucket to splash on my feet and then my chest. It wasn't comfortable, but I think it really helped because when I dipped my foot in and eventually walked into the pool, it felt a lot more bearable than my hand test. I will say, though, the water was anything but comfortable. I endured the temperature as long as possible, maybe 10 minutes, but I can't say I felt great about it. The entire time I was in the water, it felt like I was a big lobster being boiled away in a pot to be soon eaten. I'd love to say my body acclimated to the temperature, but it'd be a lie. I'll probably sound like a big wuss, but I don't know if I even made it 10 minutes in the pool before I thought I was going to pass out. I ejected myself out, and while I felt a little lame about not being able to fully handle the hot bath challenge, I figured after everything else I experienced today, I really couldn't feel too bad about this. I was woozy from the bath, though, and finished off with a final cold bath. Going from extreme hot to incredibly cold was, again, surprisingly relaxing, and I felt I quickly appreciated having this bath, as honestly, in my overzealousness of pushing myself to do this, I had really overstayed my time here and was feeling some heavy effects of too much heat. As I left the cold bath, I began to realize how much more confident I had become in this situation. I wasn't nearly as lost in my head, and honestly, while I got a few stares, I felt like it had a lot more to do with my entrance and overall disruption of the place I entered than about anything else. In the time frame and location I was brought up in, nakedness has never been normalized, and besides, with very specific people, there's always been a really heavy feeling of embarrassment when it comes to being naked with others. So just that part alone was probably the hardest thing for me to overcome, and I think it really affected everything else I did. I was really the only one who had any problems with being naked, though. There wasn't a single other person in there even preoccupied with the thought of it. It was just me. I'd probably be a fool to think that there wasn't a few of the patrons there who got either a good chuckle or a touch of annoyance from this fat idiot gaijin who buffooned his way through the Sento, but no one made that apparent to me, and really all I received was kindness and direction when I was failing from people I've never met, which is honestly really amazing. I finished by showering again and washing the bath water off my body. Without a towel, I had to hand squeegee myself as I could get back into the changing room. It was likely a little rude there too that I had not toweled myself dry before entering to change, but forgetting my towel left me with no other options. The rest of the process was straightforward. I toweled off, got changed, and left the way I came in, grabbing my shoes at the front. The one thing I didn't get to do was get some cold milk afterwards. I heard a lot of Sentos and Onsens sell them, and it's incredibly refreshing after a bath. However, I saw none for sale. There was a vending machine out front though, and I got some Pocari Sweat and called it good enough.